something here. I still can't believe it. I gotta give you your dream shot. I'm gonna send you up against the best. You two characters are going to Top Gun.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. You know, art is so subjective, and there's so much art I like out there, but I wanted to talk about 5 artists that I thought really separated themselves this year. And with me to talk about it is an artist himself, Tim Lim. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you and to all of your listeners.
Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and Happy New Year to you, brother. Now, full disclosure, because you're helping me to critique this list, you weren't eligible for my top 5 breakout artists of the year. Well, not really breakout artists. Most of these are known artists, but my top 5 artists of the year because, you know, I don't want you to critique your own work.
I do that pretty well on my own, and to be frank, I'm nowhere near even the top 150. So I am very critical of my own work. I know my limitations, and so I'm always happy to look at some of the people that are considered to be the greatest and kind of give an honest critique. As we mentioned kind of before the stream started, I am not the type of person to do portfolio reviews. I actually turned them down. So at conventions, when people are like, "Can you review my portfolio?" I tell them no. And the reason why is because 1, I don't like focusing on the negativity. 2, I know people can be very sensitive about their art. But 3, I think that in every person's particular style at a certain point, you have to let them evolve on their own. So I think this is going to be a very interesting stream.
Yeah, I hope so. So I'm not an artist by trade. You know, when I see something, I normally like it. Doing the art critiques is actually the hardest part of my reviews because I don't know technically everything I'm looking at. I'm like, oh yeah, the panels are laid out really cool. I like the way the splash page looked, but you know, I don't know technically why it's great. I just know what I like. So that's why you're here, my friend.
Well, I'm glad to help in any way I can. So hopefully we can elucidate some of the technical aspects that you might have trouble articulating.
You know, so the first one I want to talk about, you know, Stephanie Hans. You know, she broke out this year with doing the interior art for Dye. Mostly she had been known up to this point as a cover artist. She'd done a lot of work for Marvel, some really cool stuff for Marvel, even DC. She's done some interior work, but I believe Dye is the first ongoing series where she actually did all the interior work. She's a co-creator of the series with Kieran Gillen for Image Comics. You know, her work has a watercolor feel to it. It's just really imaginative to look at, you know, and excellent character and creature designs. You know, when you looked at that art, when I showed it to you, what did you think of Stephanie Hans' work?
I'd seen her before in several covers that she had done for Marvel and I think fan art probably, but I think she's actually done legitimate work for Marvel as well. What is striking about her art is it's very painterly. Now, being painterly on its own is not something unique necessarily because there's a lot of artists, especially cover artists, who do a painterly style. Most notably, Alex Ross, probably number 1. Gabriel Otto is my personal favorite. And what makes Stephanie Hans's art, I think, so distinct is that in an Alex Ross, for example, you're trying to go for something almost photorealistic, almost. So he's known for taking photos and not necessarily tracing them. He doesn't do that, but what he'll do is he'll definitely go off reference. Gabriel Del Otto, I think he achieves a very similar look, but without reference, and so it has a more comic book style to it, which is what I like. And I think Stephanie Hans is more in that same vein. When you see it, you know it's painting, whether that be traditional or whether that be digital, but it's the fact that the flow and her use of colors is enough that it puts it more into comic booky realm. It's very saturated. She has a very good grasp of her warms and cools. She has a very flowy style. If you look at a lot of her art, she likes to let her paint strokes go wherever they take her. So it's very embellished, and it's very much in a stylistic vein where she's trying to convey motion and emotion using a lot of impressionistic ideas. So I think that's one reason why people might like it. She has a very good grasp of color. She has a very good grasp of what brushes to use and when. She knows when to make something look realistic versus when to take liberty with it and make it more free-flowing. And so she's able to kind of achieve a very painterly look, but at the same time, don't lose the essence of comic bookiness, if that makes any sense. And that's a lot of people ask why I don't rank Alex Ross as number 1. And it's probably the fact that, especially when I'm reading a book like Justice, for example. I actually fall asleep like halfway through, not because the story is bad or anything, but because he is so beholden to a realistic style that there's part of my brain that just shuts off because I feel like I'm looking at a series of photographs. Whereas I think comic books and any type of illustrated media is supposed to be um, it's supposed to be a template where you use the range of the artist's imagination to kind of not be restricted. So I think that that's what makes her art so endearing.
Yeah, and another thing about her, if people don't know this, she was actually discovered on the internet. So the next time somebody wants to make fun of Tumblr artists, Stephanie Hans, I believe, was discovered on Tumblr or something like that. So there are good artists waiting waiting to be discovered on the internet. So the next one I talk about is definitely the most least known, probably the newest artist. I believe he's only illustrated 3 different comic series. His name is Sumit Kumar. He's an artist out of New Delhi, most notably known for his work on These Savage Shores with Ram V on Vault Comics. But he also illustrated another book called Ruin of Thieves with the same writer, but it was on Action Labs. Now, what really strikes me about Sumit Kumar's work is he's fantastic with scenery and settings. They're just gorgeous, and he fills them with so many beautiful details. And then he's really able to create motion through paneling, and especially in his really cool 9-panel layouts, the way that he's able to make the eye move with it through a 9-panel grid. I just find mesmerizing. What did you think about his art?
I like it as well. You're pointing out people who have very good technical proficiency. He obviously has a very good grasp of line weight, which is, for people who don't know what line weight is, it's the idea of when do you use a thick line versus a thin line, because there's a lot of reasons why you would use one versus the other. It's actually it's one of the greatest and easiest skills that you can learn. Is, for example, if you have an object that's close to you, if you use a thicker line, it's going to convey to the reader that it is closer to you. Whereas if you have a thin line in the background, it's the idea that it's background. So when you're talking about like conveying motion and stuff, I mean, like, I think he did like Ruin of Thieves, for example, and he uses a lot of like fisheye lens angles. So he'll use a lot of those dynamic shots to convey that sense of motion, and then he'll use like thin lines to basically hatch his way into showing things running towards the reader, or objects flying in the air and things of that nature. I know there's another term which is like a static shock, or static shot, not static shock, which is the DC hero, which is the idea that if you're using, when you're trying to make a comic, you don't want flat angles. You don't want everything to be eye level. You want to put the camera in different places, whether that be like at ground level or above, canted angle, a Dutch angle, things of that nature. So I think he's able to convey fluidity of motion and lead the eyes of the reader based on his strong sense of just kind of knowing how to put panels and arrange them in a way that leads the reader to go from left to right and to turn the page.
Yeah, he's just one of those real treasure, like one of those gems you discover. You're like, wow, how is he not getting all this big 2 work? Well, guess what? He's getting more work on DC Comics. He's already done a couple of minor projects for them, and I expect we're going to see him at DC much more in the future.
Absolutely, and he has a hatchy style. So some people like to go very tight in their pencils and inks, and some people like to kind of wing it and have it look more sketchy. And there's times when he kind of fluctuates between one and the other, so you get good flavor out of him in terms of how he's able to kind of change things up depending on what the scenery needs. So hopefully we'll see more from him as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. So the third artist I want to talk about is Ron Garney. He's a veteran comics artist. He's worked on Justice League, Amazing Spider-Man, Hulk, Daredevil, Captain America. He's worked on a lot of the real major projects for the major companies. Specifically, the reason I was drawn to him this year was his work on Savage Sword of Conan. It just feels completely different in today's market. It's really dark and brooding. Uses a lot of like sharp angles and a lot of heavy use of shadows for contrast with the characters. What did you think about Ron Garney's work on Savage Sword?
It's really cool. It harkens back. I mean, he's a great choice because when you're looking at Conan, for example, you're already thinking kind of an old school. And so being able to have someone who can make that transition in a way that's still palpable to old readers and new alike is very good. I mean, I think there's like, in terms of artists who are kind of traditional in the sense that they have a style that harkens back to kind of like an 80s and maybe early 90s era, are probably Ron Garney and Graham Nolan, where it's kind of hard to tell what era that the art comes from because it's almost timeless in the way it's depicted. And it actually works well with flat colors as well as modern coloring. So I think that the choice of him on Conan was actually very apropos given his particular art style. He has a very good, one thing that distinguishes the traditional artists is that they're very comfortable in their use of light and shadow. They're very good at negative space in terms of being able to put down shadows where they need to, because they know that conveys the weight and gravity of the object or the person that they're trying to draw. And they know when to put that out there and when to hold it back. And so he's obviously a traditional master of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just some of those depictions of Conan in this series, like that is so brutal and cool. The contrast with the shadows just really sold it on me, or just sold it for me.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And there's that one cover, I think, like I said, if you look at the black and white art, it's good enough on its own. You can look at it, you can tell what's going on. He's a traditional master of conveying what needs to be conveyed in those panels. But then if you look at the covers for like Conan, for example, like the one where he's on a raft eating like a shark, obviously there's digital coloring that's added to it, and it just accentuates it. It doesn't even necessarily make it better, but it complements it very well because the art already speaks for itself. So very, very good choice for Savage Sword.
All right, so the final two are probably maybe the two best comic artists in the industry. The first one I want to talk about is Gary Frank. He's a British artist, 30-year veteran of the industry. Jeff Johns calls Frank's rendition of Superman the best of his generation, and the only other artist in the same league with Frank in this regard is Kurt Swan. Probably the only artist who I think could have done a sequel to Dave Gibbons' work on Watchmen. Just a master at comic book art. What do you think about Gary Frank?
I love him. Actually, my only introduction to him was from this year's Doomsday Clock. I actually wasn't aware of his work before, but you're right. I mean, in terms of someone who could be a spiritual successor to Dave Gibbons, there is, I think, no one better than Gary Frank. I mean, it's one of those things where from a technical aspect, he has a good grasp of it. One of my biggest criticisms, personally, this doesn't affect readers for sure, but I don't like overly rendered art. That's just a personal take of mine, because a lot of times the rendered art is just masking imperfections, which in and of itself is okay. I mean, as an artist, that's just one of the tricks of the trade. If you're not good at depicting one thing or another, a lot of times you can just make a mess and make it technically proficient, and you can hide it. But if you look at Gary Frank's art, even if you were to take away a lot of the hatching and stuff like that, he has a very good sense of weight and proportion. It does not even matter necessarily if the hatching is there or not. You just know that he knows what he's doing. The hatching just accentuates it. It adds to his skill level in terms of conveying weight and dynamism. And so I love looking at the art of Doomsday Clock, picking it apart, and seeing just how, almost like what makes it tick underneath the surface. But yeah, his rendition of Superman, very old school. It has a very almost Jose Garcia Lopez, the guy who did all of the character sheets from the 80s for DC Comics, I think. It has that same kind of look to it. So he has a very good depiction of Superman. I will say I don't think I like his Joker rendition that much, but it's a personal take. It's not because it's objectively bad or anything like that. But if anyone has reservations about Doomsday Clock, just from an artistic perspective, it's really good.
Yeah, so many people are using 9-panel layouts, and I talked about Sumit Kumar and the way he's using it, and I think it's brilliant. But they make it so boring. But Gary Frank is able to use that panel layout that Gibbons made famous, and he really utilizes it to its fullest, in my opinion.
Well, and the 9-panel layout is difficult. It's very, very hard. Um, I tell a lot of people who are trying to get into comics, there's a lot of technical things you have to know beforehand before you even start. But one of the things that you're going to run into very quickly is, oh my gosh, how many panels do I have per page? Because unless you actually sit down and dissect a comic book, I don't think that's something that people actively think about, is how many panels on average do you have. And I think the average for the industry is 4 to 6. That's considered a very good economy of space. When you get into 9 panels, I mean, you really kind of have to know what you're doing because there's a lot of things that can happen. For one, you don't have that much room to work. Well, actually, I take that back. You have a lot of room to work with, but a comic book is a marriage between the art and lettering. So if you have a character who's very verbose, that's not going to necessarily fit into 1 panel out of 9. But there's a way that you can arrange a 9-panel layout where you can take advantage of it. And I think that him with Jeff Johns working on Doomsday Clock, I think they pulled it off magnificently. There's a part of me that actually thinks it's a little bit more easy to digest than Watchmen. Watchmen is obviously a tome, whereas I think Doomsday Clock is a lot more accessible to your everyday reader.
You know, so the last artist I'm going to talk about, funny enough, I don't like his 9-panel layouts, but I don't know if it was his fault. It might have been the writer. You know, he collaborates with Tom King a lot. I'm talking about Clay Mann. I discovered him on Valiant Comics, work on, you know, Exo Man of War and Ninja K and some of that stuff. You know, he's really made his name at DC Comics. As far as comic book artists go, I think, you know, he might be the best artist today. He's right there with Gary Frank, in my opinion. You know, he has exceptionally smooth pencil works. His panel layouts are magnificent, and his rendering of the female form is flawless. You know, what are your thoughts on Clay Mann as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if I had to pair Gary Frank and Clay Mann and put them side by side, I think that Gary Frank is technically, I'm not even going to say superior. Let me just put it this way. It is more obvious that Gary Frank's rendering and his form and function is slightly better than Clay Mann. Again, that's just my personal opinion. But Clay Mann, if rendering is what we're going to be looking at, he has the economy of rendering, where he puts down basically a form, a silhouette of the character, and he only puts in as much detail as he needs to kind of convey what's there, whether that be the crease in where 2 muscles interact, or whether it just be a series of lines going through the middle of the torso to show a chiseled form. It's good. And not just that, but I feel like even his use of pencil work without inking on top is also already very, very solid in terms of being able to convey what needs to be conveyed. So I think it's another good choice. His heroines, I don't know if this is a reason why you like them or not, but he typically will depict them as being fairly muscular. And I don't mean that in like a She-Hulk kind of way, but enough to show
Like athletic.
that they're athletic, that they can stand their own in terms of this universe. He has like a pretty popular rendition of like Harley Quinn, the Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, and Batgirl together. And his Batgirl obviously is someone who goes to the gym. It's not like some gymnast slash ballerina, so to speak. It's someone who actually, you know, lifts weights and stuff like that, and who can actually probably do Krav Maga or actually fight in MMA, so to speak. And he does it without having to masculinize them, which I think is to his benefit and to the benefit of the readers as well.
Yeah, he kind of got a little bit of trouble with Heroes in Crisis, which are the pictures that I'm going to be showing with his rendition of Lois Lane. I guess people thought a picture of her in a Superman shirt was like a pinup, but she was much more feminine than I'll agree than his Batgirl rendition.
Sure, absolutely. But yeah, as far as his overall style and his overall rendering of characters, I mean, again, very solid choice.
Mm-hmm. All right, you know, so that kind of wraps up, you know, the 5 artists I want to talk to. I really appreciate you laying down some knowledge on me and the viewers today. You know, is there one artist out there that you think, you know, I probably should have kept on there, or maybe someone that you look up to as someone that's a master that's working today?
So the one that I discovered recently, thanks to people such as yourself and other people online that I was not aware of, is Jorge Jimenez. So he worked on
Yes.
Super Sons, and so
Yes.
someone described him to me as being like, oh my gosh, this is like almost like American manga. Um, might be a little bit hyperbolic, but I see where they're coming from. I love his style because again, when you see it, it's very bright, very colorful. He does that thing where he can do you can break apart his characters into simple shapes, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. So he knows what he's doing. He has a very good knowledge of line weight as well. He hatches a lot, but he uses very, very small, almost like micron tip pens to do it. And I think he does a mixture of digital and traditional. But if you've never read his run on Super Sons, if you have some extra Christmas money and you want to get a gift for yourself, and I'm talking to the listeners out there, not necessarily US. I know you probably already have this, but do yourself a favor and just pick up his 2-volume run on Super Sons, which I think was part of Rebirth. You won't be
Mhm.
disappointed. Very good stuff.
He draws the best Jonathan Kent, in my opinion. Made me fall in love with the characters, the way that he renders him made me think of my son. So Jimenez absolutely has a special place in my heart, and he's doing some fabulous work on Justice League right now with Scott Snyder. So I think that'll wrap everything up. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tim, and I really appreciate it, bro.
Absolutely. And to all you listeners out there, and to Wes himself, again, Merry Christmas season. Happy 2020. I think 2020 is going to be a great year for the industry, for artists, just for entertainment in general. So I have very high hopes, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again in the new year.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.